Meeting. It's 9 o'clock. We'll move on with the agendas today. We do have a quorum. The first agenda that we're going to deal with today would be Building and Grounds. I've called the meeting to the order. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the prior committee meeting? So first and a second, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Beatty. Discussion around the minutes? Motion to approve?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is a position that currently is vacant. Frank is requesting to backfill the position. Frank, do you have anything you want to add in regards to that position?
It's a cleaning position, a nighttime cleaning position. We had a resignation, and I believe it's a position we really need, so I'd like permission to fill it.
Okay. Mr. Simpson? Mr. Beatty? Is there any discussions around that? Motion to approve.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, referrals are pending. Committee tabled action on the request to renew the lease agreement with D&G Recycling pending determination as to whether the lease was behind on payments. I don't know what the status of that is, but I know Supervisor Wild has been working on some options in regards to that facility down there. He has taken some photos that shows that there needs to be a little bit improvement in the quality of care in the facility itself outside. But I'd like to turn that over to Mr. Wild if you'd like to add anything to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
what he's discovered over the period of time.
Yeah, last week I went to see Mr. Finger at D&G, and we talked about the terms of the proposed lease agreement, but where the conversation eventually led to was the housekeeping of the property. So we still have an issue with garbage, basically his garbage that's being strewn all over the place. When I met with him last week, I set up another meeting for yesterday afternoon. I went yesterday afternoon. He told me that he'd cleaned in the morning, and the pictures didn't look any different from what they did last week. As a matter of fact, they probably looked a little worse. So there's a housekeeping issue that needs to be into effect in any kind of new agreement that we have with them. But at the same time, I also decided that it would probably be prudent, instead of forcing something on him, to look to see what some of our other recyclers were doing. So I went to Waste Management down in Fort Edward. It's a very large facility. It was eye-opening in terms of our zero-sort recycling and what comes out of that and what goes into it and the issues and the business issues that Waste Management has. But bottom line is they policed their area very well. There was not garbage all over the place. There wasn't paper up against the fences. There wasn't paper in the grasses. It was well maintained. I also went to Hiram Hollow. Basically, they're just putting things down on the ground and scooping it up. There wasn't much for me to see there. But after that, I went to Perkins. Perkins was a prior leaser of this property and looked at their facility. Outside of their facility was very well maintained. There wasn't garbage or trash out there. But as part of that conversation, although I don't have the email yet, Perkins has mentioned that they'd be interested in releasing that property from us. So, and Jack, you and I spoke about it. It may make sense for us to go out to an RFP because Perkins was paying us at the time, years ago, $8,000 a month, where right now D&G is paying us $4,000, and I believe I can get up to $5,000, but that still leaves quite a bit up in the air in terms of what we might be able to get out of this property. I guess the proposal that I have for the committee to consider is to going out for an RFP to see about leasing this property and see if we can get Perkins to respond and D&G to respond and see if we can get the best deal we can for this issue or for this property. There is another issue. We talked about it last time the committee met about the roof. There is a leak of the roof. Like I I said, we discussed that last time, Jack. I think you requested that we get a structural analysis done of the roof itself to understand if we had any long-term financial obligations to maintain that property. It could be a couple $100,000 and then $5,000 a month. It's going to take us a long time to recoup that. So I think we need to look at that also. And the other option that I have on the table that I'd like the committee to consider is placing an RFP out for someone to market the property. As I mentioned before, it is on a rail siding. The DEC has no active or prior issues with contamination on our site. All the contamination was on the prior site that CB Geigy had. So I'd like us to also consider potentially going out for an RFP to find someone to help us market this property. So that's my
Thank you.
update.
Mr. Simpson?
We store the emergency services vehicles in that
Do.
building. So that's something we just actually invested, probably 8 years.
Yeah.
$100,000 in.
Close to $100,000.
100, that's right. Getting that suitable for storage equipment. So I'm not sure if we, it's one thing to say we're going to lease out the building. Are we going to separate that section of the building and continue to?
It's all up in the air.
Where would we put the EMS equipment?
That's a really good question. If we were to market and sell the property, that becomes less of an issue. If we lease the property, then it could be a bigger issue for us. There is also the fact that I've heard that there might be an insurance issue with us storing our emergency equipment in a highly dusty environment. Potential for fire is there. I'm not sure how our sprinklers are in that facility, but we might have an issue with the storage of our equipment there because of the dust potential liability of fire.
Any other discussions?
No easy answers.
So, Mr. Thomas?
We authorized $100,000 to be spent on that building.
That's a good question. I
Yeah,
can't answer that for you.
I thought that was gonna be a $15,000, $20,000 fix, not $100,000. Well, we should have built another building.
With the work that's been put in there the last couple of years, part of it was, and it was approved to this committee, not by me, by my predecessor who brought it to committee. It had to deal with repairing most of the columns within there. They put strapping on the roof for the columns for structural support, and Clark Patterson did all the engineering on it. So I say it's somewhere $80,000 to $100,000. It's somewhere in that range. So this was authorized years ago to be done.
We still have a leaking roof.
Mr. Chairman, if you
And
don't
that
mind. Frank, did you get a chance to get any feedback on the roof itself?
I did. I have a price, $157,000. I wouldn't hold that price because it needs to be updated. TP Monahan is giving me an updated quote, but that'll be pretty close.
And that's for replacement?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. So
I have Garland Company is coming Thursday morning. They have a new system where they think they can patch it. It would mean repairing all the seams, but that should be significantly less than the 157. That I would guess be in the neighborhood of 40,000. And the LED lighting that I was asked to get pricing on is 5,000, roughly 4,800.
and along those lines, I know that's something that Gary and DG has requested that we put LED lighting in. I did explain to him, I said there has to be some kind of cost share because we're not going to do that ourselves because he's going to realize the benefits.
Frank, are you going to have to get other bids?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have to
Go out for professional bids? Okay. Mr. Beatty?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear in my mind. So Frank brings up a great point. This committee was discussing whether we need a new building for the EMS emergency command central vehicles. We got costs from $100,000 to $800,000 for a new building. I remember that. We said, well, it's more cost efficient if we go down to that building, D&G, and store it there. That made sense to me. We now have, and shame on me for not knowing, but we now have spent $100,000 to refurbish the building. We've got to put a $147,000 roof on it, $5,000 for new LED lights. So we're about at $250,000, and there may be liability issues with the dust. Maybe we didn't make the right decision after all. Sometimes, we think we are. I don't think anybody has any ill intent of making a bad decision. But sometimes it turns out that way. But I wasn't aware of how much money we poured into it already. And my fault, I probably missed it. But the new roof, another $147,000 and $5,000 for LED. Maybe, and this is crazy, maybe we revisit building a new building for it and then selling the piece of property. I don't know.
Well, that was the subject of discussion today, is what is the end result, what we want to do with this particular facility. We do have someone there now that's been leasing it for $4,000 a month. There's some maintenance upkeep issues that are prevalent. We do have another recycler interested in bidding on the property that was there, that was a tenant prior to this one. So it's up to the committee to decide what they really want to do. Personally, if there was an opportunity to put it back on the tax rolls, I would prefer going in that direction. Again, that's something for the committee to discuss. We can do all of these things and coordinate these things to be done relatively within the next 6 months or so, get an estimate on the repairs, and then figure out what we want for the future and put an RFP out. The question about the structural issues is that I'm concerned if we don't have a actual engineering report from a structural engineer, maybe Kevin has one now, that we could be liable to what could occur inside that building if we just patched the roof and there was something else matters. Mr. Weiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is one other option that I failed to mention, is that D&G did express interest in purchasing the building and the segment of the property that the building exists on. So there's another option for us. And, there's a lot of property there. Just thinking out of the box, there's room for us to put a building up for our emergency equipment. And we'd have to subdivide it, obviously, to do something like that. But maybe we could market, sell that piece and sell another piece to Perkins. Just thinking out of the box.
Okay. Mr. Garrity?
Yeah, John, is that property, is that one of those where you'd have to do environmental studies on that?
Yeah, that was part of the original
That's what I was going to ask you.
And I think there were severe limitations with Sipagagi and BASF on what you could not do with that site. I think that needs to be investigated. You also have easements and right-of-ways to the Sipagagi site that is currently being monitored there on the west side, because the main access to the site is through the county property, and so there's going to be easement issues. So I guess that answers your question, but I have a question of my own.
Sure.
Assessing the charges for refitting the building to make it structurally more sound, and assessing that to the storage of the emergency vehicles and equipment is not quite fair, because you've got a whole building there. Most of that building is being leased by another party currently. So a lot of that structural repair could be looked at as, your everyday maintenance and not necessarily assigned to the emergency services. The roof repair, $40,000, or replacement, $160,000. If Mike negotiates, $60,000 a year lease, and the roof has, a 20-year, 30-year warranty, so it will pay for itself. And not only that, it makes, if we do decide to market the building, I think the bottom line comes down to money. What are you going to get? if you're gonna get a couple $100,000, maybe it's not so good. If you're gonna get a couple million, maybe that looks better, but I don't know. Probably falls in between. But there are issues with this piece of property that are gonna make it difficult to market. But again, my saying was that, my thinking was that it's not fair to assess everything to the emergency services, vehicles, and equipment storage for the repairs of the building. It's something that is going to, D&G too. But, and I want to thank Mike for doing the good work.
He's done a lot of work on this particular subject. So I put this out here for the committee to think about. If you want to continue with that discussion, at least get some ideas of where you want to go with this, we can discuss it at the next facilities meeting. But we got to get moving along. We still have the monthly arrangement with D&G, but I think we got to make some decisions shortly. If there's any opinions now, I'd like to hear that in regards to it.
I just wanted to do a follow-up for the chairman asking about the structural. We had, based on the work that was done in the facility, there was a structural assessment done by Clark Patterson. I do have a copy of that, and that's why we did all the work there. And Frank, it would have been probably much more expensive, but we did most of that work in-house by our own staff, our own welder. We did not put it out to bid. We did it in-house to keep the cost down.
Well, when we started out, it was
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hello.
I'm inclined to agree with your earlier statement about essentially that we're not real estate in business of owning real estate. If we have a particular use that we can get out of that property that benefits the taxpayers of Warren County, then let's utilize that to the utmost advantage financially. Other than that, I would agree, let's offload it, because that's not our business model.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wild?
Jack, if I may, Mary, we've talked about the contract that we have and the contract for sale of Ciba-Geigy. And I believe we talked about whether there was any limitations to us selling that property. And if you could just give us a quick update, if you can. Otherwise, I'll just kind of guess.
Sure. So the two in the contract for purchase from Ciba-Geigy, there's an indemnity provision that basically the county has to indemnify Ciba-Geigy going forward for any environmental issues on the property. The two previous county attorneys have both issued opinions that that indemnity can't be sold or bought by anybody else. So regardless of the next owner, the county would still be liable for Ciba-Geigy for any environmental issues they find going forward, regardless of if we own it or not. I don't know enough about environmental issues to change that opinion of the previous county attorneys. But if we move forward, I would strongly suggest that we hire outside counsel for that particular issue, just to see if we can get rid of that indemnity.
If I could add to that, Mr. Chairman, I spent some time speaking with the DEC about this property early on. I think I mentioned it in one of our prior meetings. But when they were doing their test wells to understand where the contamination was, they did a few tests on the property that we currently own, and there was no finding. So all the, and this is my conjecture of this, but based on the land itself and how it slopes to the river, the contamination that they had basically went towards the river instead of coming towards our property. So I think the liability is still there, as Mary mentioned, but I think it's minimal. And I spoke with Jack
Kelly?
Jack Kelly. And Jack was more optimistic than others that I talked to about possibly moving this property. Maybe that's just his nature. But he felt as though there was some value in the marketplace for this. And the only way for us to really understand if there was any interest is to have some professional go out and pursue marketing this to see what might happen. And as far as the environmental piece, the stated that you can buy insurance for that, the liability. So I'm not sure what the cost is. We didn't get into that level of detail, but I think that's something else that we could think about as we move forward. And just to expand on our decision, hopefully, that we can make today, I wonder if there's any consequences of us saying that we want to do an RFP for marketing, an RFP for leasing, an RFP for possibly selling and subdividing the property. If anyone knows if there's any consequences of us doing three things at once.
I'm not aware of any consequences. I don't know how the committee feels about that. Is there any opinions of the committee? Certainly kind of makes sense to me. I mean, there's no harm in doing that. It's going to cost a little bit of labor. But other than that, we'll be able to pin down exactly what we want to do with that piece of property going forward. Certainly if we have somebody else interested in it, you know, there's no harm in getting competitive bids on the lease if we choose to do that. It sounds to me like we're going to have to fix the roof regardless of what we do with it. That's certainly going to be part of the equation, but it's up to the pleasure of the board of what you'd like to do, or I can make some recommendations. I'd just like to see what your thoughts are, or do you want to continue this discussion at the next meeting? It's Mr. Stroud.
Well, I think we're waiting for more information. Kevin's going to get some more information about repairing the roof, so we can't make a decision until we have those ducks in a row. The other thing is, I don't think it'd be expensive is to get an appraiser to appraise the property and see what the potential market value might be, and that would go into our decision process, and that wouldn't be expensive. So until I get more knowledge, I can't make a decision.
Would it be the pleasure of the board then to authorize an appraisal on the piece of property? Kevin says he has the money in his budget already existing. That's what the board would like to do.
I think that's a good idea.
Mr. McGowan?
Yeah, I'm just a little confused because the unknown environmental issues over there, that, you know, there's a possibility it might not be as bad as it is, but it could be. But, I mean, trying to get a price tag on a building on something that you don't know what's underground. There's so many other properties around Queensbury that are just sitting there and won't sell because we have a contract that says that we're liable for it. So it's crazy to think that we're going to get any form of great money from there.
Well,
what's underneath.
The current tenant has mentioned that he'd be interested, and the building is currently retrofitted for the recycling purpose. It has a baler in there already, so if somebody's in the waste paper business and they're looking to expand, enlarge, or start an operation up, they got the county's baler that the county's paid for in there, and they're using that to bale waste paper for exporting and shipping locally. Mr. Wild.
Thank you, Jack. You know, in terms of what Brad was saying, there is a rail siding there. And that's what the appeal is. There's not many properties in the county that has a rail siding. So, you know, again, thinking out of the box, if we could make something happen, right? It could be some
worth a lot of money.
Could be worth a lot of money. So, and you know, the opportunity of bringing in another industry or expanding on what's currently there, I think it's worth a shot to see if we can, you know, maybe do some economic development.
Mr. Lowe? Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to make a motion that we hire an appraiser to evaluate the property to see what our options are for selling the property.
Is there a second? Mr. Beatty, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Mr. Stroud, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to say that investigating what we could and could not do with the western side of this brownfield site, DEC did approve the upper level. They tend to look at it in levels. The upper level is clean, even on the western side now, because of percolation of the water, cleaning the water. But the bedrock down below is still considered to be very contaminated. So if you're going to do anything like dig into the ground to put foundations in, you're going to have to go through a DEC program to be able to do that. It's not impossible. It's going to cost more money for anybody that wants to develop a site, and that should be kept in mind as well.
Okay. Mr. Lau?
Sure, thanks again. You know, one of the things that I might suggest is that we look at an environmental attorney to help us work through those issues. I'm not sure how expensive it would be, but to, you know, truly understand what I heard from the DEC and what's in our paperwork to see if there is, if my impressions are correct.
We'll leave that up to Mary to make some recommendations in regards to that and bring it back to the committee.
I do have an idea for that.
Okay.
I had the idea of amending our contract with Nixon Peabody, who we're currently using for the railroad. They're a pretty big firm, and they also have a real estate section which concentrates in hazardous and environmental issues. So I could just amend my contract with them and keep the not-to-exceed amount that's already there, and ask them to look into this issue as well.
Is there a motion to approve that recommendation?
I'll make that's to approve what Mary just
Yes.
suggested. I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? Mrs. Frazier? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Is there anything else to discuss around that particular D&G site at this point? Okay.
I guess, Jack, I'm just curious, where do we stand? I know we've got a couple of things we're going to look at, but I feel I need to communicate with D&G, at least to be fair to them.
We're going to continue with the monthly agreement that's in place at this point in time, and we're going to get a cost associated real estate appraisal on the property.
You're talking about the whole property or their specific parcel?
I'm thinking just that particular parcel.
Okay.
Mr. Stroud?
Chair, do we need a resolution extending that, because last time we extended it for 30 days, I believe? Do we need a resolution extending the current lease agreement even further?
That's,
That's what we've been doing.
we haven't done that regularly, but if it's the pleasure of the board, we certainly could extend it another 30 days.
Well, committee authorized a 1-month extension for D&G recycling lease agreement. It's in the,
Okay.
I'm just plain to say.
All right. Is there a motion?
Kevin, do you know what's in the contract? Do we have the right in the contract to do month to month?
I think that's what we have been doing, is there's something written in the contract that does allow it to go month to month. That's what we
Is there a motion, there was a motion put forward on the floor to extend the contract with D&G for another 30 days. Is there a second?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Kevin?
Just one thing I wanted to add, Supervisor Wild, you asked, for the appraisal, and we're going to do the appraisal. We've got to, I guess, determine what we're going to do the appraisal on. You say the parcel. The parcel is a 14-acre parcel. It's not just the building. We haven't subdivided this yet, so what we'd be looking at right now is a 14-acre parcel there. If you want me just to have the appraiser specifically for the building, and then maybe give him a line in the sand, say we're only going to separate this, 7 acres or 5 acres or whatever it may be for that site. But he's going to need to know that, because if I ask him to do an appraisal on that site, he's going to do it for the 14 acres. That includes our shop as well. Our shop is on that same parcel. It's not separated parcels right now.
I'd like to value the building.
So, I'm sorry, Chairman, I think my recommendation would be to separate out our facility that we have there for Kevin and the DPW, and maybe do 2 pieces. One, the remaining whole parcel, and a certain segment just for that building. And maybe we can talk about what makes sense in terms of what that smaller parcel would look like. But I could go over to D&G and find out what they had in mind in terms of what they would like to purchase if that's still on the table.
Okay.
I'll offer with Kevin on that, and we'll get it done later this week, get it started.
Any other questions? Okay. Move on with the court project update, Frank.
The temporary entrance, they've been working on tearing that out, basically from the inside out, so it's been inoperable now for a couple of weeks. Hopefully by the end of this week, it'll be gone, and then they have to reset the granite steps, which I don't think that'll happen this week, but within a couple of weeks, I think that'll be back in place. In Phase 2, most of the rooms are finished with the exception of flooring and baseboard. There's one coat of paint on everything. They'll need to go back and touch up and do another coat. I think that's about it as far as done. Our clerk of the works estimates they'll be out of there by the end of November. And then we'll be doing punch lists and just going back and cleaning things up. So by mid-December, we should have full occupancy in the Phase 2 part.
Any questions for Frank? Chairman Conover?
Frank, I know you keep in mind that this building is no longer a major entryway. The concrete promenade that comes in from the parking area is in pretty sad shape, as well as the steps and things, and I think that I'm concerned about,
I've actually been working with Oil and Water. There's some grants available now for green space, like forest sidewalks, cisterns for rainwater, for watering flowers. So we're applying for a few of those grants, and that main entrance is pretty much what we have in mind. That's one of the areas we want to concentrate on. There may be a chance of getting that whole thing redone under this grant.
Yeah, I don't know that we need that great an expanse any longer.
No, it would be narrowed down and more green space, more flower gardens or whatever, and the hope is we could water it and take care of it with natural sources.
Cut down on maintenance. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Any other questions for Frank? At this point in time, I'll open up the floor to discussion. Anybody from the privilege of the floor? Anybody have anything to mention? If not, we'll move right into the airport meeting. Meeting has been called to order. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of our? We did that for the airport. Oh, it's one combined. Okay. All right. There's no action on the agenda or no new business. Referral pending items, none. Discussion, Collings Foundations canceled this year's due to weather. Don, would you like to elaborate on that?
No, it pretty much says it all. The initial date canceled due to weather, and then their rain date canceled due to weather. So a lot of interest in it, a lot of phone calls, but unfortunately they couldn't get it here this year, so we're hoping for next year or the year after. Steve, they come every other year here or every year?
It's every other year. They try to do what they can.
Okay, well, maybe next year. The Experimental Aircraft Association, our local chapter 353, had a very successful Young Eagles Day on Saturday the 14th. They flew about 50 kids. It's always a great event for the airport. And FBO update, Mary, if you want to just update the committee on where we're at with the contract.
Do you want me to?
Sure.
So my suggestion at this meeting would be to introduce the public hearing at the November board meeting, which would set the public hearing for the December board meeting, and you could pass the lease, the FBO lease, in December. That would give me some time to finalize the lease, send it around to Kevin, Don, and Ryan, get their comments, and then still have time for the board to see it before the board meeting. So that's my suggestion at this point.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Sokol? Mr. Simpson.
You need a resolution for that, or?
We need a resolution to introduce the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Mr. Beatty? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, thank you. Okay.
The last item that we have on that information for discussion is one of the things I asked Don to do, or I tasked him to do when he started here back at the county, was to look at some alternatives to the runway extension, because there were many concerns with what the impact would be to wetlands, to the Marlton. So I'll turn it over to Don in a minute, but this is one of the concepts that Don has come up with the help of CNS, as far as making a change to the extension of the runway. So Don, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, what you're looking at there is a 1,000-foot extension of the runway off to the south end, pretty much what we've been talking about right along. The only difference here is what I think might work, and we'd have to, of course, run past the FAA for some further consideration, is to, instead of shifting the landing threshold for runway 1, leave the landing threshold in place, but make the additional 1,000 feet available for takeoff only. So what that does is it keeps the safety area for the runway in its existing location. And in my mind, one of the primary needs for the 1,000-foot extension is for takeoff on runway 1, which is our primary runway. So what that does is, for the 4 operations at the airport, it gives you a full 6,000 feet of takeoff for runway 1, which is the critical, load up aircraft with fuel. It doesn't change the landing distance for runway 1. That remains at 5,000 feet. And for runway 19, landing in the opposite direction, it gives you another 400 feet for landing and for takeoff. So we get benefit for 3 of the 4 operations. Some of the benefits that we believe come from this, number 1, there's no major earthwork. The hill doesn't have to move. Site grading goes from 67 acres down to 12 acres. Wetland impacts go from 10 acres to 1 acre, approximately. And there's potential for no off-site mitigation. We're looking at 22 acres of off-site mitigation that requires constant monitoring for years and years. We could eliminate that probably. No major changes to the existing drainage patterns at the airport. We believe there'll be no impact at all to the Marlton. Tree removal, we were looking at 23 acres of tree removal, brings it to 0. And the cost, we were looking at $8 million with about a $400,000 county share. Well, now we're looking at about $3 million with a $150,000 county share. So I think when you look at the benefits and you weigh them against the impacts, I think this is something that we should really look at, and looking for direction from the committee to continue discussions with the FAA on this.
Mr. McDevitt.
Don, this almost seems a little too good to be true. That's a lot of good news, built into that. With the FAA, can you think of anything obvious that they would look at and say, hey, we will not support this?
Well, we've talked to them informally about this, and they want more information. So basically, what in the past, we've come to them with a scope of work and a determination on, hey, we're looking for 6,000 feet for all the operations. Now we have to come back to them and say, this is what we're thinking, and we have to show them in writing that it's justified, that the potential benefits from operational impacts are justified for this.
Mr. Loeb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, if you could explain what these 4 columns are for the letters. And it looks like we're still adding 1,000 feet to the intrusion onto the green space. And what's the difference, I don't know what the term would be, architecturally? What's the difference between this 1,000 feet and the 1,000 feet previously proposed?
Well, when you add 1,000 feet of pavement for landing, that means you have to add another 600 feet of safety area off the end of that. So what we're doing here is we're leaving the landing threshold in its existing location, and then the 600 feet of safety area is already there. So nothing has to change. All we're doing is adding the pavement, and that bigger envelope for the safety area, which extends approximately 250 feet to the side of center line, and then 600 feet off the end. It doesn't change, it's already there. And that 1,000 feet has already been prepared for asphalt for a runway surface. When we did the safety area work back in '08, that entire area was prepared, so it's ready just to put asphalt on. There's minimal ground disturbance there. The acronyms here are landing distance available, takeoff run available, accelerated stop distance available, and takeoff distance available. Pilots use them for their calculations. But in short, when you're landing on runway 1, you're just going to have the 5,000 feet. That's the one benefit we do not get out of this. But for takeoff, you'll get 6,000 feet on runway 1, and then for landing and takeoff on runway 19, which is the opposite direction, you'll get another 400 feet because you need 600 feet of safety area off the end. So that's where that 1,000 feet comes in. Does that make sense?
So how much pavement are we actually adding?
1,000 feet of pavement.
Right. And it's because of this usage configuration, you're eliminating the additional safety zones.
Right. So if we were to move the threshold for runway 1 to that new 1,000-foot location, now we have to add 600 feet off the end of that. Additional. That's where all these other impacts come in, and that's where the Marl Fenn impact comes in.
And that's not only length, but width also.
Yes, exactly. And that's where all the impacts come in. That's been the problem right along. It's not the pavement itself, it's the safety area associated with the pavement and moving that landing threshold. But if you don't move the landing threshold, then you don't have those impacts. So you get 80 to 90% of the benefit for the aircraft using it. The only thing you don't get is extending the runway for landing on runway 1. You get a benefit in every other direction.
Mr. Stroud, been waiting.
Yeah, well, Don, I think this is a little bit of a masterpiece you created here. It does solve a lot of the issues that have been brought up, and it certainly solves the issue of runway length takeoff, and that is the critical part. It's not so much landing, but the takeoff with the full load, and depending on environmental conditions, that's the significant thing. And Don's proposal here, if the FAA buys into it, does solve that problem and does cut costs. So it looks like a win-win.
Mr. McGowan?
Don, do most planes come in from the north and land south, the bigger planes?
Most aircraft are using runway 1. I mean, obviously it depends on the wind, but runway 1 has the primary ILS approach to the airport, and the predominant wind direction here is out of the north-northwest. So runway 1 is the predominant use runway.
Now, for some reason, if they're coming in, I mean, the whole thing really, another part of the extension was for, safer landing. But with the newer designs of the planes and lighter weight and this and that, if they're landing in and coming in and they happen to need the extra, are they able to go out and then come around?
Yeah. You're getting 1,000 feet of pavement that's usable as needed.
Now, the reason it's not landing is for the approach coming from this way, correct?
Right, so for both runway thresholds, we're not moving them. So when you're landing from runway 1, the lighting configuration is going to show you the landing threshold in its existing location.
Okay.
Which also means we don't have to change any of the nav aids, we don't have to change approach procedures, we don't have to shift the antennas, we don't have to do any of that. Everything stays right where it is.
But really, Mr. Strauss stated, it's quite a masterpiece. So, very interesting.
Mrs. Bramer, do you still have a question? Your hand was up earlier.
My question was that on the 19 landing, you'd still be able to use that pavement as needed, like in an emergency if they come up.
Right. So when you're landing on 19, in the pilot's calculations, they'll be able to add 400 feet of additional surface for their calculations. But they still have the 600 feet of additional pavement. actually makes it safer, because if they do have to use that additional pavement, it's actual pavement, they're not going off into the grass where they would be now.
I mean, I'm really glad that someone finally took the time to go back and look at alternatives. I still would like to know more and make sure the FAA is happy with this concept, and that it is not going to impact the moral fund, that we do not come back in 5 years and say, oh, we're just gonna, you know, we're gonna do this other extension project anyway. So I'd like to make sure that we can do that and just be sure that it's not too good to be true. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, couple more comments. Mr. McDevitt?
Yeah, just Claudia, I'd like to thank you. I think this is really your suggestion that we take another look at an alternative, so it was obviously a great suggestion, I think. And then maybe as just to clarify, Don, the environmental impact in terms of Morro Fen, whatever, that you feel that issue has been put to bed.
Well, I'm looking for direction from the committee here, but if you say, move in this direction, let's look at and explore it a little further, then we'll be able to come for sure to put to bed. But looking at it right now, it appears there'll be no impact on the Morro Fen.
Beatty?
Yeah, first of all, great work, Don. I'm fully, I too want to know more information though. On its surface though, it does address a number of serious concerns that I had, which was, it's actually not 8 million, it's about 10.8 now. That was 8 million was a 9-year ago estimate. It's up to closer to 11 million, but my concern was wasting taxpayer money. If that is significantly decreased, going from that 11 million now down to potentially 3 million, county share 150 plus additional costs. But I'm very appreciative of that huge savings. If we'd gone forward with the other one, obviously we're looking at millions more dollars. The other part that was very significant to me in the initial here is the environmental piece. As Claudia said, if I can be reassured that the Morro Fen won't be disturbed, that's huge to me. And the fact that we go from clear cutting 67 acres down to 12, the fact that we instead of destroying 22 acres of trees, we go down to 0. I mean, those are all very, very positive environmental wins. So I'm cautiously very happy on this potential new information, and I think it will, if it all comes to fruition, I think we can probably find a nice compromise and happy medium here that will satisfy just about everybody, I think.
So is it a consensus of the board that we encourage Don to continue with that, that dialogue?
I think that definitely.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question for Don, and Don, I reiterate that, you know, this is great stuff. In your informal conversations that you've had with the FAA, did they bring up any concerns?
They just wanted to make sure that the operational benefits were there for this, because you're losing the 6,000 feet for landing on runway 1. So we would have to demonstrate to them that yeah, we're losing that, but we're still getting enough benefits from takeoff on 1, you know, and the additional landing on 1.9 to compensate.
So what's your gut?
I think, you know, I'm presenting it to you. So
We'll find out.
No, what, in terms of what the FAA is going to say.
You know, I never know what they're going to say, but I'm optimistic.
Right. Good.
Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to open this up to the floor for the public. Anybody from the public who would like to address the committee? Mr. Whitehead? Mr. Whitehead?
Thank you. I'd be happy to if anything that we just said was true, but it's not. Please take a look at, and I'm also sorry to do this at this point in time, because I did reach out and try to say I would like to have some discussions outside of this meeting about this, and Max stopped over there say what I need to say now, and I apologize, it might take time. But if you look at the diagram, I'd like to point out that the marl fen is that pigeon-shaped, darkish spot above the new newly excavated runway, proposed excavated runway. And the marl fen, as you know, is unique compared to the other wetlands in that area in that if you measure the pH of its water supply, it is highly alkaline. So we do not know where that water supply is coming from, but we suspect it's coming from the peat beds, which are just immediately below that, just exactly where you're proposing to excavate 150-foot wide by 1,000-foot long runway, which would have to be filled. That's all peat bed. You're going to have to go, every time you put a shovel in the ground, you're going to end up coming up with water. You're going to have to put a lot of fill in there, and the whole reason why they're looking at putting in a hydrology study right now is to try to figure out where does that alkaline water come from? Where is it originating from? And we know from past experience that when you dig in that area, you come up in that peat bed with all what's called marl. Marl is calcium carbonate deposits, little white, looks like shells. It's been there for tens of thousands of years, and the suspicion is that's where the alkaline water is coming from. To be, looked at in the spring when the hydrology study begins. Second of all, this, so I don't see where this doesn't have any less effect on the marl fen than any previous proposal that I can say. Furthermore, when you look at the predominant usage that was discussed, runway 1 landing, still 5,000 feet. You don't gain even a single foot. And when they're landing, they land the other way, and then that becomes 5,400 feet. So you're putting in 1,000 feet of destruction, and you're gaining nothing in one direction, 400 feet in the other. There are better alternatives to this. You could go to the other side of the runway, runway 19, and do the same thing over there without disturbing the marl fen. There's at least 400 feet between the end of that runway and Hicks Road. When I look at it on Google Maps, it's more like 600 or 700 feet, but I'm not exactly sure. But you could get, that would be another one you ought to be looking at if you're looking at it. And I encourage you to look at it with the kids. But this will not, any way, shape, or form, change the effect on the marl fen. The only effect it might have is that when you go out further, saying you won't touch the RSA there is another portion of the marl fen which was to be filled in. That might not have to be filled in. But other than that, this excavation is the same excavation that you were looking at before, as far as I'm concerned. So I do have considerable concerns. I'd like the opportunity to, outside of this meeting, sit down with the engineers and with Mr. DeGraw and to share some of this and maybe everyone again outside of this meeting.
Just to address one comment.
Yes.
This area, I believe, has already been prepared because it was established for the safety area back in '08. So I believe it's 1,000 feet and 250 feet on either side has already been established. So I don't think there'll be little to no digging there.
It's been graded. When you go through that's an old peat bed, and when
It's already been established. It's ready for pavement.
Well, you'd have to show me that. I don't believe that's true.
Mr. Conover.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, the process, the environmental review process, where there are impacts, we're obligated to look at alternatives, and that's a requirement that we have. And I would say that this is a fascinating idea. I'm sure that Don would be happy to meet with Travis to discuss any other alternatives. But I mean, the short answer is that we're obligated to do this as part of the process anyway. And if we can get to a better solution at less cost, and who can't support that. So I would say that, and I commend Don and Kevin for really engaging the process as you should, which is to at least consider before we take an action that there might not be other options that we could undertake to mitigate or avoid the impact. So, kudos to you, and I think that we should continue within this process. I think we should communicate our desires to FAA. Let's see where they come down on this, because let's face it, they got a big amount of cash into this project. But again, kudos to the staff for at least stepping out and engaging the process as I think they should.
Okay, thank you.
I recall that all being graded out there, Travis, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, so that certainly somebody's going to be out there with a bulldozer doing it. It was a major work in terms of the base for overrun is done. I would comment that the takeoff distance is a limiting condition for most of these aircraft not under Part 91, but 91K and 135, where they have to calculate a takeoff based on an engine failure at a bad time. And so extending the takeoff distance is really the limiting condition for most of these aircraft. And moving it south, takeoff, by allowing them to start 1,000 feet sooner, is going to get them higher over Chestnut Ridge as well. So, great solution.
Good, thank you. Well, it is a consensus of the committee to continue on with your dialogue with the FAA and see where we end up with the alternative.
Okay, we'll bring back some more information next month.
There's another gentleman who would like to address the board.
I would, please.
Let's just thanks.
Good morning, all. My name is Adrian Reichenstein, and I am the current president of the Northeast Hot-Air RV Campers on the Hill. And I'm here to, thank you for letting us use that field. This was our 18th year of being up on the hill and enjoying the balloon festival. But it is also the third year that the county has charged us $10 per rig to be up on the hill. We started in 2000. Our company, President Bill Cameron, made a deal with the county to be able to use the field for our recreation, and then 3 years ago the county had a resolution to charge us $10. I'm here to ask, and I'm not sure that this is the right group of people, but I'm here to ask that that resolution get rescinded, so that we would not have to raise our membership fee to cover that $10. And we do spend a tremendous amount of money to support the balloon festival. At least 2 people in every rig, and the kids, as they get on the bus, they go down on the field, they all come back with a bag in their hand. Spend a lot of money that way. We support 2 balloonists. We sponsor them. And that's kind of great too, because they inflate their balloon right up there where the campers are, and the kids get to help get that balloon inflated and so forth. So my reason for being here is to get your support. If this is not the right group of people to help me get that resolution rescinded, so that it's a little easier on us financially. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We'll take your thoughts into consideration.
I just wanted to back up a little bit for the resolution that Adrian's talking about. It was because the county provided, we used the Veterans Van during Balloon Fest, and we provided rides from the RVers up off the hill back down to Balloon Fest. This year, as you all know, I brought to committee that Adrian wanted to actually use their own bus, but we still also supplied our Veterans Van to bring people down. So that was the That was the $10 that was added in for their cost up there on the hill. Adrian's using our facility. We still provide a bus. My opinion is I think we should still keep the $10 in place.
Okay. In that regard, we did hire our own bus, and it cost us about $1,200 for that school bus, and it was less than what it could have been because the owner of the bus company is one of our committeemen, and he drove the bus for one day. So we still spent $1,200 out of our pocket on a bus to support the people going up and down. The veterans bus is not quite adequate to handle the number of people that go up and down the hill. Last year, on Saturday morning, there were 100 people waiting for the bus to get down on the hill. Chairman Cannell, we average a little over 100 campers. Our best year was 200 campers, but that was it.
Well, we'll take your thoughts into consideration, and we'll have that discussion at our next committee meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Anybody else from the public? Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carried.
Sorry.